Alright, this little subscriber special that I never did, but let's just consider this a 500 subscriber special, even though it's kind of a little bit over that, but whatever. So today, just doing a little overview on my Yu-Gi-Oh history and how I got started, because why not? I did one for Vanguard, and now I'm just going to do one for Yu-Gi-Oh! So it kind of started back as a kid in elementary. Yeah, it's been that long. I was playing Pokemon, got very addicted to Pokemon at that. Eventually I got bored of Pokemon and some people were introducing me to Yu-Gi-Oh! And that's where I kind of got started with Yu-Gi-Oh! But before I actually bought the card game and all that, I did watch some episodes back at TV as a kid. That's kind of my first exposure to Yu-Gi-Oh! But it wasn't too interesting to me. I remember it was Sartorius kind of on the table against Chaz, and that was actually the first episode I ever watched, funny enough. It wasn't Duel Monsters. I actually just knew about it but never really got into it. Now, my full main exposure of Yu-Gi-Oh! Was actually the Pyramid of Light movie, just because it was in an old tape that I found in the 99-cent store. I enjoyed it, I liked the monsters, Blue Eyes Shining Dragon was definitely awesome, Sorcerer of Dark Magic, and my first exposure to Egyptian gods. I actually liked all of that stuff and they look really cool to me. That's actually how I got into Yu-Gi-Oh! A bit. But eventually I came across to going to Target more often and seeing a bunch of Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards in the shelf. I don't remember what first Yu-Gi-Oh! Products I kind of bought, but it was more so the Collector Duelist Pack tins of Yusei that I remember with Stardust Assault, along with some old GX Collector tins that Target was actually selling on sale on the time. I remember it was like Plasma, Volcanic Doomfire, along with Rainbow Dragon, and eventually I came across this card shop that I kind of went weekly to just buy random ass stuff, just because. But speaking of playing around 5D's time, my first deck of Yu-Gi-Oh!, at least the one that is an actual archetype, was practically Elemental Heroes with Neos. I remember I was trying to pull Rainbow Neos because Rainbow Neos was awesome. I was trying to build a Rainbow Neos deck with Neos Wise Man. Sure, it wasn't consistent and I was one of those kids who was just playing one copy because it was weird to play multiple copies. I remember that one time I pulled a Ghost Rare Stardust Dragon, that made me. And unfortunately as a kid, of course things get stolen because people like stealing cards as a kid, right? Eventually, don't know how long it took, but I did build a Blackwing deck and I was also collecting Signer Dragons at the time. Blackwings were pretty cool and it was a little more of a competitive deck. It was fun. Eventually, it kind of got mashed in with a Dragoonity deck that I was building because I was doing Dragoonity Blackwings. Eventually, I split those in two decks. I played Dragoonities and had Blackwings. I sold my Blackwing deck because I got tired of it. My Dragoonity deck got stolen because, of course, this is middle school time. And then eventually, I kind of just took a break from Yu-Gi-Oh! Overall. I was a little occupied by playing Vanguard around the same time as well because that's when I got introduced at Vanguard from the very beginning, but that's not important here. We're talking about Yu-Gi-Oh! I pretty much took a break from Yu-Gi-Oh! Until Order of Chaos came out with Yu-Gi-Oh! Zexal, and I'm gonna be very honest, ninjas were kinda awesome at the time for me. I ended up building the deck. Sure, it wasn't like a complete deck or anything because this is middle school budget we're talking about along with high school budget, but it was fun. There was the Chaos Dragon deck that I enjoyed. There was also the Dark World structured deck I enjoyed. I enjoyed these decks at the time. They just looked cool, so I just played it. But after that, during the Yu-Gi-Oh! Zexal era, I practically haven't built an actual deck. I pretty much took a break from actually building any decks, but I still bought product. None of the decks really interested me. They were just okay, meh. And in design-wise, the only ones I really care about was Galaxy Eyes. Other than that, I pretty much had no interest in building any decks. I do remember liking the concept of Rank Up Magic because that's when Yu-Gi-Oh! Zexal to me at the time got interesting, but now I do like Yu-Gi-Oh! Zexal as an overall whole show because it was pretty great and it actually had great storytelling. But anyway, when it went to Arc 5, I was a little iffy about it. Pendulums was something else. But this is where I started building actual big decks. The first thing was a very surprising Exceed monster out of Dark Rebellion Exceed Dragon. That actually was awesome to me and that really got me into the show. And eventually building more decks as more characters get revealed with more archetypes. The one that really interested me most was at the time DDDs and eventually with Shun along with his Raid Raptors. And the main reason with Raid Raptors was actually because of the rank up magic. I really loved the rank up magic with Revolution Falcon at the time. It was awesome. I did combine it with Utopia as an engine at the time, but as more cards came, I eventually made it more of a pure Raid Raptor deck. And then another thing about Arc 5 was legacy characters, meaning old archetype support was going to be bound to happen, and it was nice to see. Red Dragon Archfiend interested me right off the bat, and eventually I did end up building a Red Dragon Archfiend deck. And then it just continues off with Arc 5 era, where I didn't really build any of the decks. Been thinking about Dimension Dragons, but I didn't really want to build the Odd Eyes Pendulum Magician deck and put in the Dimension Dragons in it. I just didn't really like that archetype overall, and I was still playing with budget era type spending because it was high school budget, so I was not going to have that many decks. And then Vrains became a thing, which became another questionable ruling change with Lynx. I was very iffy about it as well, but the more I think about it, Pendulums was more the bigger issue, so I kind of went along with it, especially the extra deck spam at the time. And then Lynx became that part too. But then when it came to building decks, well, first of all, Revolver immediately interested me because of his personality and character, and then his deck was shown to be Guns with Dragons, which I immediately like. I ended up building the deck. Eventually, waited for a Borreload reprint, because for some reason his main boss monster was expensive and I was not going to build that type of deck until they reprinted it. So eventually when they did, I actually had a Rocket deck or the Bullet deck without the Borrelsword Dragon, because Borrelsword at the time was very expensive and I was not going to pay $70 for that. Waited for a reprint on that too. Eventually, because I had budget and I was working, I decided to build a Galaxy Eyes deck because I like Galaxy Eyes. And there was Galaxy Eyes support at the time, so I went with a why not. Eventually, I went to At Ignisters because At Ignisters was cool, with I being one of my favorite characters, so of course I went with that too. Eventually, Vrains ended, and it ended quite too early, and they had to cut the show short from what I heard. And then the booster sets after were a little more interesting, considering that they were bringing a lot of legacy support back. The one that kind of interested me was Blazing Vortex because Armed Dragons, and I already like dragons because I'm a sucker for them. The playstyle definitely interested me, but I did not actually build the deck until a few months after the set was released. I eventually ended up liking the deck. It was very fun, I'm not gonna lie, I still like the deck. And then at that point I was thinking to myself, since I had 5 out of 6 of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Rivals decks, I was thinking about building Blue Eyes, but instead I ended up building Cyber Dragons. Why? Because at that time I had one deck for each main summoning mechanic, at least not rituals anyway, because I had a Synchro, Exceed, Pendulum out of DDDs, which is a combination of everything, Lynx, and one that focuses on a main deck with Armed Dragons, so I eventually built Cyber Dragons because there was also the structured deck at the time with Cyber Darks. So that ended up being my fusion deck. And then eventually it just kind of looked weird to me that I did not have the last of the main rival decks, so I ended up building Blue Eyes, which a friend of mine sold to me. So now I still currently own the 6 Yu-Gi-Oh! Rival decks, and I do like all of them because all of them are basically dragons other than DDDs, but still like all of them. Had a few other decks here and there, but these were the main ones I end up playing. Eventually there was the Crystal Beast structure deck that really interested me, and I also ended up building the deck. Aesthetic wise it was already awesome, so I just had to do it. And then we go to pretty much today, where pretty much I'm just keeping up to date with Yu-Gi-Oh! Now. Rush Duels is weird, but I am still into the show. So that's basically my overall journey with Yu-Gi-Oh! At the moment, and from beginning to now. But anyway, go ahead and tell me your story, because why not? How did you get started and basically your journey through it? But in that's it for this, and see you all next time. And thanks for the 500.